In 1972, a maintenance worker at Willowbrook State School opened a basement door that had been sealed for 23 years. What he found inside changed everything we thought we knew about this place. You've probably heard of Willowbrook. It's become a symbol of institutional horror, overcrowded wards, neglect on a scale that's hard to comprehend, children left in their own filth, forgotten by a system that was supposed to protect them. In 1972, journalist Geraldo Rivera walked through those halls with a camera crew and exposed conditions so disturbing that it sparked a national outcry. His footage showed the world what happens when society looks away. But here's what most people don't know. While Rivera's exposé revealed the visible horrors, while investigators documented the abuse happening in plain sight, there was something else at Willowbrook, something that never made it into those reports, something hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy, sealed doors, and deliberate silence. The facility opened in 1947 on Staten Island, designed to house 4,000 individuals with developmental disabilities. By the 1960s, over 6,000 people were crammed into those buildings. The abuse, the neglect, the inhumane conditions, they're all documented. They're part of history now. We know what happened in the wards, in the day rooms, in the spaces everyone could see. But the real horror wasn't in the wards everyone could see. It was beneath them. What you're about to hear isn't in the documentaries. It's not part of the official narrative. It's the story of a sealed basement, a forgotten experiment, and the maintenance worker who made the mistake of opening a door that should have stayed closed forever. This is about what happened before the scandals, before the cameras, before anyone was paying attention. This is about the basement incident at Willowbrook State School. And I need to warn you, once you know what was down there, you'll understand why they tried so hard to bury it. John Halloway had worked maintenance at Willowbrook for 3 years, long enough to know which pipes rattled in winter, which doors stuck in humidity, which parts of the building staff avoided after dark. He'd seen things that made him uncomfortable, the overcrowding, the understaffing, the way some wards smelled like despair had soaked into the walls. But he kept his head down, did his job, collected his paycheck. March 14, 1972 started like any other day. A work order came through. Water damage in the sublevel near the old administrative wing. Simple enough. Check for leaks, assess the damage, file a report. He grabbed his toolbox and headed down. The sublevel was quiet, too quiet. His footsteps echoed off concrete walls painted that institutional green that seemed to exist only in government buildings and hospitals. The smell hit him first, not mold like he expected, but something metallic. Rust? Maybe. Or old pipes bleeding iron into the air. That's when he saw it. The door. It wasn't on any maintenance map he'd ever seen. Solid steel, painted over so many times the layers had created texture like tree rings. But what caught his attention were the markings. Someone had stenciled words across it in faded red paint. Authorized personnel only do not open without admin approval. Underneath, in what looked like newer paint, someone had added, sealed by Order 1949, 23 years. This door had been sealed for 23 years. John stood there, crowbar in hand, feeling something he couldn't name. Unease, maybe, or curiosity, probably both. The water damage was coming from behind this door. He could see moisture seeping underneath, pooling on the concrete floor. He had a job to do. He wedged the crowbar into the gap between the door and frame. The seal resisted, paint cracking like old skin. He pulled harder. Something gave with a sound like tearing fabric. The smell that rushed out made him gag. Not rot, not decay. Something chemical and sweet, like formaldehyde mixed with something he couldn't identify. Old air, trapped for decades, finally exhaling. John pulled the door open. His flashlight beam cut through darkness thick as smoke. A corridor. Long and narrow, stretching back into shadows his light couldn't reach. The walls were white tile, yellowed with age. The floor was linoleum, cracked and peeling, and lining both sides of the corridor were doors, small doors. Child-sized doors, each with a number stenciled above it. His light swept across the nearest room. The door hung open. Inside, a small bed frame, rusted and empty. A table. A chair designed for a child. and scattered across the floor. Toys. A stuffed rabbit, its fur matted in gray. Building blocks spelling out words he couldn't make sense of. Drawings pinned to the wall, faded, but still visible. John stepped inside. The drawings showed the same thing over and over. A circle with lines radiating out, like the sun maybe, or an eye. Each one signed with a different name. Sarah, Thomas, Michael, Rebecca. 34 names. He counted them. The next room was the same, and the next. Each one frozen in time, like the children who'd occupied them had simply vanished mid-activity. Beds unmade, toys abandoned. In one room, a cup of water sat on the table, long evaporated, leaving a perfect ring of mineral deposits. But it was the last room at the end of the corridor that made John's hands start shaking. A desk, file cabinets. Medical equipment he didn't recognize. Strange devices with wires and headpieces, vacuum tubes dark and dead, and covering every surface, stacks of paper, documents, logs. All stamped with the same header, Sleep Study Protocol Classified. John picked up the top file. His eyes scanned the first page. Clinical language, observations, subject numbers instead of names. Words like deprivation threshold and consciousness modification and stage 4 implementation. He flipped through more pages. His stomach turned. These weren't medical records. This was something else. Something is wrong. The final entry was different from the others. The handwriting was shaky, frantic. Just 3 sentences. They are awake now, all of them. We were wrong about sleep. John dropped the file. Papers scattered across the dusty floor. He backed out of the room, his breath coming too fast, his heart hammering against his ribs. The corridor suddenly felt smaller. The air is thicker. The silence was too loud. He left everything exactly as he found it. Walked back through that corridor, past those small doors with their numbered signs, past the toys and drawings and frozen moments of abandoned childhood. He pulled the steel door shut behind him, the seal breaking with that same tearing sound. John Halloway filed his report that afternoon. Water damage, cause unknown, recommend sealing. He didn't mention the corridor. Didn't mention the rooms or the files or the toys scattered like evidence of something unspeakable. He quit his job 2 weeks later. Didn't give a reason. Just collected his final paycheck and left. He wouldn't talk about what he found in that basement for 31 years. Not until 2003, when a researcher tracking Willowbrook's history contacted him. By then, John was 74 years old. He agreed to one interview. Described everything in detail: the door, the corridor, the rooms, the files. At the end of the interview, the researcher asked him why he'd stayed silent so long. John's answer was simple: because I read those logs. I know what they did down there, and I know what they found. Some doors stay sealed for a reason. But what did those logs say? What happened in those rooms between 1947 and 1949? What kind of study requires sealed doors and classified documents in 34 children who simply disappeared from official records? When researchers finally gained access to the documents, John Halloway discovered through a Freedom of Information Act request that took 6 years to process and require intervention from 3 separate advocacy groups. What they found read like something designed to make you question whether institutional oversight has ever truly existed. The sleep study protocol began in August 1947, just 3 months after Willowbrook opened its doors. It was initiated by Dr. Emil Vorstman, a neurologist who emigrated from Austria in 1946. His credentials seemed legitimate at the time: a medical degree from the University of Vienna, published research on consciousness and neural patterns, and letters of recommendation from colleagues in Europe. What nobody checked, or perhaps nobody wanted to check, was what kind of research he'd been conducting during the war years, where he'd been, what he'd learned. The stated purpose of the protocol was clinical: to study the effects of sleep deprivation on cognitive development in children with severe developmental disabilities. The goal, according to the proposal submitted to Willowbrook's board, was to determine whether regulated sleep interruption could reset certain behavioral patterns and potentially improve cognitive function. On paper, it sounded almost reasonable. This was 1947. psychiatry was still experimenting with lobotomies. Electroshock therapy was considered progressive. The line between treatment and experimentation was blurry at best, invisible at worst. But the reality of what happened in those basement rooms was something else entirely. Dr. Vorsman selected 34 children for the study, ages 6 to 12. All of them classified as unreachable cases. Children who didn't speak, didn't respond to stimuli in expected ways, existed in states the medical establishment of the time barely understood. Children, in other words, who wouldn't be missed, who had no advocates, whose parents, in many cases, had surrendered custody completely. The protocol had 4 stages, each one documented in meticulous detail. Stage 1 was 48 hours of sustained wakefulness. The children were kept in individual rooms with constant bright lighting. Every time they began to drift towards sleep, staff would intervene, loud noises, physical touch, whatever was necessary to keep them awake. The logs from this stage are clinical, detached. Subject 7 resisted intervention at hour 36. Increased stimulation required. The subject remained awake. Subject 19 exhibited emotional distress at hour 42. Monitoring continued. Stage 2 extended the deprivation to 96 hours. 4 days without sleep. The documentation changes here. The clinical detachment starts to crack. Subject 12 no longer responds to names. Appears to be looking at something staff cannot observe. Recommend continuation to stage 3. Subject 23 has begun vocalizing in patterns, repetitive sounds without apparent meaning. Note: subject has been nonverbal since admission. First vocalization recorded. Here's where it gets disturbing. Multiple children, kept in separate rooms with no contact with each other, began exhibiting identical behaviors. They'd rock at the same rhythm, make the same sounds, and they drew. On the walls, on paper, with whatever they could find, the same symbol over and over. That circle with radiating lines, like the sun, like an eye, like something trying to open. Stage 3 was what Dr. Vorsman called extended wakefulness protocol. The logs don't specify exact duration, just sustained deprivation beyond conventional thresholds. 1 week, 2 weeks. The documents become harder to read here, not because of content, but because whoever was recording them was clearly struggling. The handwriting degrades. Sentences become fragments. Day 9, Subject 4 and Subject 17 speaking simultaneously. Same words. Rooms separated by 40 feet. No auditory contact possible. Day 11, mirrors removed from all rooms. Subjects do not recognize their own reflections. Stare at mirror images as if observing strangers. Several instances of fear response to my own reflection. Day 13, all subjects are now drawing the symbol. Identical proportions. Subject 28 drew it with eyes closed. Perfect accuracy. The researchers who eventually analyzed these documents noted something that still sends chills through academic circles. At the 72-hour mark, every single child, regardless of their previous cognitive state, their diagnosis, their level of function, reached a threshold. After 72 hours without sleep, they changed. Not gradually, suddenly. Like something switched on, or something else switched off. They stopped crying, stopped resisting. Their movements became synchronized even across separate rooms. They'd turn their heads at the same moment, point to the same empty corners, and they spoke. Even the children who'd never spoken before. All of them spoke, but not in any language the staff recognized. Just sounds, rhythmic, patterned, like they were responding to something only they could hear. Dr. Vorsman's notes from this period are obsessive. The subjects are not deteriorating, they are transitioning. Sleep is not rest, it is a barrier. We are witnessing what exists on the other side of consciousness when that barrier is removed. Stage 4 was supposed to be the final phase. The documents don't fully explain what it entailed, just references to full protocol implementation and sustained contact with the waking state. What we know is this: Stage 4 began on February 28, 1949. 15 children were selected from the original 34. The most responsive subjects. For 3 days, documentation continued normally. Then, on March 3rd, everything stopped. The final entry in the official logs is administrative, cold, brief. Protocol terminated by order of Director Walsh. All documentation to be sealed. Basement level to be restricted access indefinitely. Staff involved to sign non-disclosure agreements. No further comment. But that wasn't actually the final entry. There was one more, found loose in the file, written on a torn piece of paper, in handwriting that doesn't match any other document in the study. They are awake now, all of them. Not the children, what's inside them. We were wrong. Sleep isn't rest. Sleep is a lock. We removed the lock. God forgive us. We removed the lock. No signature. No date. Just those words. 34 children entered those basement rooms. 34 children were eventually transferred out of Willowbrook between March and August of 1949, sent to different facilities across 3 states. Their records were separated, their files archived under different classification systems, almost like someone was trying to make sure nobody would ever connect them again. But someone did connect them. In 1987, a researcher tracking patient outcomes found something impossible to ignore. All 34 children from the sleep study protocol died before their 19th birthday. Every single one. Different facilities, different states, different circumstances. But the cause of death was always the same. They died in their sleep. And in every case, the staff who found them reported the same detail. Their eyes were open. What happened in that basement between 1947 and 1949? What did Dr. Vorsman actually discover? And why was everyone involved so desperate to bury it that they sealed it behind a steel door for 23 years? The answer might be in what happened next. Because when that door was opened in 1972, when John Halloway walked into those rooms and read those files, something else woke up too. The piece of paper with that final entry, "Sleep is a lock. We removed the lock," wasn't found in the official files. It was discovered by John Halloway tucked inside a desk drawer in that last room at the end of the corridor, folded twice, edges yellowed. The handwriting was shaky, written by someone whose hand was trembling so badly the letters barely stayed on the line. Researchers spent years trying to identify who wrote it. Comparing it against every staff member's records from 1949, it didn't match Dr. Vorsman's handwriting. Didn't match any of the nurses or assistants assigned to the protocol. The leading theory is that it was written by Dr. Harold Chen, Vorsman's research partner, who signed off on every stage of the study right up until March 3, 1949. But Chen's official personnel file lists his employment ending on March 2nd, one day before the protocol was terminated. Reason for departure: personal leave, indefinite. He never returned to Willowbrook, never practiced medicine again. And in 1952, he died by suicide in a motel room in Pennsylvania with all the lights on. But to understand why that note exists, why the protocol was terminated so abruptly, we need to piece together what happened during those final 3 days in February 1949. And the only evidence we have comes from fragmented sources, incident reports that were filed and then buried, testimony from staff members who broke their non-disclosure agreements decades later, and maintenance logs that recorded things the administration couldn't fully suppress. On February 28, 1949, Stage 4 of the sleep study protocol began. 15 children. The most responsive subjects. They'd already been awake for weeks, already transitioned into that synchronized state where they moved together, spoke together, saw things nobody else could see. Dr. Vorsman's plan for Stage 4, based on the proposal fragments that survived, was to maintain this state indefinitely, to study what he called the pure waking consciousness, the state of awareness that exists when sleep, that biological reset button, is permanently disabled. The children were moved into a single large room in the basement. Observation was continuous. Bright lights remained on. Staff rotated in shifts, monitoring through a window in the door. Everything was documented. Everything was controlled, until it wasn't. The first incident report is dated March 1st, 1949, filed by a night nurse named Dorothy Keene. She reported that at approximately 2:17 a.m., all 15 children stood up simultaneously, not gradually. All at once, like someone had pulled strings attached to their spines. They formed a circle in the center of the room, and they began to move, not dancing, not walking, just swaying, in perfect unison. and they were humming. That same rhythmic pattern that had appeared in the Stage 3 documentation, but now it was louder, unified. 15 voices created harmonics that, according to Dorothy's report, made the window glass vibrate. She called for Dr. Vorsman. He arrived within minutes, observed through the window for 20 minutes. His notes from that observation are clinical at first, subjects demonstrating unprecedented synchronization, neural entrainment beyond predicted parameters, but toward the end, the tone shifts. They are not moving independently, they are being moved. Something is using them to configure, to form a pattern. Recommend immediate. The sentence ends there. Just stop mid-word. The second incident report is from March 2nd, morning shift. A different nurse, Patricia Hollings. She reported that when staff entered the room to provide food and water, the children didn't acknowledge them, just kept standing in that circle, swaying, humming. But here's what made Patricia file the report. The children's eyes had changed. She described them as darker, like the pupils had expanded to fill the entire eye, but still responsive to light, still moving, still seeing, but seeing what? Another detail from her report, the temperature in the room had dropped, not dramatically, but noticeably. And despite the bright overhead lights, shadows in the room seemed thicker, like they had weight. By the afternoon of March 2nd, more staff were reporting problems. Headaches when standing near the basement level, a feeling of being watched. Equipment malfunctions, lights flickering, recording devices producing static, one camera capturing footage that, when developed, showed nothing but geometric patterns where the children should have been. And then there was the sound. Multiple staff members reported hearing it, not from the children, from somewhere else. A low-frequency hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves, from beneath the floor. One maintenance worker described it as a vibration, like something massive breathing on the other side of something thin. Dr. Vorsman was still insisting everything was proceeding normally, that these were expected phenomena. Breakthrough observations. But his assistant, Dr. Chen, had stopped taking notes. According to one testimony from a staff member who was there, Chen pulled Vorsman aside and said something that made the lead researcher go pale. Nobody heard exactly what was said. But immediately after, Vorsman ordered Stage 4 to be paused. He wanted the children separated back into individual rooms. It was too late. The final incident report is from March 3rd, 1949, 4:47 a.m., filed by the night security guard, Robert Price. He was making his rounds when he heard screaming coming from the basement level. Not children screaming, staff screaming. He ran down to find nurses and doctors backing away from the observation window. Inside the room, 15 children were still standing in that circle, still swaying, but now they were speaking, all of them, in unison. Words Robert couldn't understand, but wrote down phonetically in his report. Thanao AICC Vren. Thanao AIC Vren. Over and over, a chant. And behind them, on the white tile wall, shadows were moving. Not cast by anything in the room, just moving, forming shapes. That same symbol the children had been drawing, the circle with radiating lines, but massive, covering the entire wall. And according to Robert's report, it looked like it was opening. Dr. Vorsman stood at that window, staring, not running, not calling for help, just staring. Another staff member whose name was redacted from the report grabbed him and asked what they should do. Vorsman's response was recorded word for word, "Nothing. We do nothing. We just watch what comes through." But Director Walsh, who'd been summoned by the commotion, made a different decision. He ordered the basement evacuated immediately, every staff member out. The children to be sedated and separated, the protocol terminated. According to the staff who were there, Dr. Vorsman refused to leave, said they were at the threshold of understanding. That this was the moment everything changes. It took 2 security guards to physically remove him from the basement level. The children were sedated with enough medication to drop a horse, according to one nurse. It took 3 times the normal dosage before they finally stopped moving, stopped humming, stopped staring at that wall where the shadows had been forming impossible shapes. By noon on March 3rd, the basement was empty. The children were separated into different wards under quarantine protocols. Dr. Vorsman was escorted off the property. His employment terminated effective immediately. Dr. Chen had already left, his office cleaned out, his notes gone, his whereabouts unknown. And Director Walsh made the call that would seal Willowbrook's darkest secret for the next 23 years. The basement level was to be closed. All documentation archived and classified. Every staff member who witnessed what happened in those final days was required to sign non-disclosure. Agreements with legal language so aggressive it basically threatened criminal prosecution for speaking. Within a week, the steel door was installed, painted, marked with warnings, and sealed. The 15 children from Stage 4 were transferred out first. Different facilities, different states, separated so completely that their records would never intersect again. The remaining 19 children from the earlier stages followed over the next few months, and as we now know, all 34 of them died before turning 19, all in their sleep, all with their eyes open. But here's the detail that doesn't appear in any official report. The detail that only came out through testimony decades later from staff members who finally broke their silence. After the basement was sealed, after the children were transferred, after everyone involved was sworn to silence, the sounds didn't stop. Staff working late shifts reported hearing it, that low-frequency hum, coming from beneath the building. From behind that sealed door, a vibration. Like something massive breathing on the other side of something thin. And some nights, when the building was quiet, they heard the humming. 15 voices, synchronized, rhythmic, coming from a room that was supposed to be empty. The basement stayed sealed for 23 years. But what they locked away down there wasn't just evidence of institutional cruelty or unethical experiments. They locked away something they'd woken up, something that had been waiting on the other side of sleep, something that 34 children had opened a door to and couldn't close. And in 1972, when John Halloway broke that seal and walked into those rooms, he didn't just discover the past, he woke it up again. John Halloway filed his maintenance report on March 14, 1972. Simple, professional. Water damage in sublevel corridors. Source unidentified. Recommend permanent sealing. He attached a form requesting materials: concrete, rebar, industrial sealant. He didn't mention the rooms, didn't mention the files, didn't mention the toys scattered across floors, or the drawings on the walls, or the feeling that had crawled into his chest the moment he opened that door. His supervisor, a man named Carl Dennison, approved the work order without question. Basements flood, pipes break. Buildings as old as Willowbrook had 1,000 problems competing for attention. One more sealed corridor wouldn't raise eyebrows, but John made a mistake. He talked, not officially, not in any report. But over coffee in the break room, he mentioned it to another maintenance worker, said he'd found something strange in the sublevel. Old rooms, children's rooms. It looked like they'd been abandoned in a hurry. The other worker, curious, asked if he could see. John said sure, didn't see the harm. Within a week, word had spread through the maintenance department, then to the nursing staff, then to the administrative assistants who'd worked at Willowbrook long enough to remember whispers about the basement level, about things that happened before Geraldo Rivera's cameras, before anyone was paying attention. People wanted to see. The first group went down on March 21st. 3 staff members, 2 nurses and a janitor who'd worked at Willowbrook since 1965. They brought flashlights, spent 20 minutes walking through that corridor, looking into those small rooms with their frozen moments of interrupted childhood. They took nothing, touched nothing, just looked. One of the nurses, Margaret Torres, would later describe the experience in an interview conducted in 1998. It felt wrong, she said. Not scary, exactly, just wrong. Like we were somewhere we weren't supposed to be. Somewhere that had been closed for a reason. And the whole time we were down there, I had this feeling that something was watching us. Not from the rooms, from deeper in. From the walls, maybe. I don't know. But when we left, I felt relieved, like we'd gotten away with something. More people went down over the following weeks. Urban exploration before urban exploration had a name. Staff on break. Curious administrators. Even a couple of doctors who'd heard rumors and wanted to see the space where experiments had supposedly taken place. Most people had reactions similar to Margaret's: unease, the feeling of being watched, a persistent discomfort that lingered even after they left. But 3 people had more severe responses. David Kelmer, a maintenance worker, went down into the basement on April 3rd, spent about 15 minutes exploring, came back up pale and sweating. Told his coworkers he'd felt dizzy down there, like the air was too thick, like he couldn't get enough oxygen even though he was breathing normally. He went home early, called in sick the next day, and the day after that. When he finally returned to work a week later, his coworkers noticed he looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, hands shaking slightly. When someone asked if he was all right, David said he hadn't been sleeping well, kept having the same nightmare. He was in a white room with no windows, lying on a small bed, and something was standing in the corner watching him. He couldn't see what it was, just a shape, a darkness that didn't match the shadows around it. And in the dream, he knew, absolutely knew, that if he fell asleep, it would come closer. He started drinking coffee obsessively, staying up as late as possible. His supervisor noticed, suggested he see a doctor. David refused, said he just needed to push through, that it would pass. It didn't pass. 6 weeks after he entered that basement, David Kelmer was found dead in his apartment. Heart attack, according to the medical examiner. He was 32 years old, no history of heart problems. When police entered his apartment, they found every light turned on, the television on, the radio on, and on his bedside table, an alarm clock is set to go off every 30 minutes. The second case was Linda Peretti, a nurse who'd gone into the basement in late April. She had a similar experience: dizziness, the feeling of being watched, a lingering sense of wrongness that followed her home. But her symptoms manifested differently. She didn't have nightmares. She had something worse. She stopped being able to tell when she was asleep. Linda described it to a colleague before she left Willowbrook. She'd wake up in the morning, or at least she thought she'd wake up, and go about her day. But sometimes, hours in, she'd realize something was wrong. Details that didn't match reality, people who shouldn't be there, conversations that looped. And then she'd actually wake up, in her bed, and realize the entire day had been a dream. Except sometimes she wasn't sure. Sometimes she'd wake up 3 or 4 times in a row. Layers of false awakening, each one feeling completely real, until she couldn't trust her own perception anymore. Couldn't tell if she was actually awake or just dreaming that she was awake. She quit her job in June 1972. Moved back to live with her sister in New Jersey. According to her sister's testimony, Linda's condition worsened. She became paranoid, afraid to sleep. When she did sleep, she'd wake up screaming, convinced she was still dreaming, convinced she'd never actually woken up since the day she went into that basement. Linda Peretti died in 1974, overdose of sleeping pills. The investigators ruled it accidental. She'd been taking them to force herself to sleep and had lost track of how many she'd taken. But her sister believed differently. She believed Linda took them on purpose. That she'd decided the only way to escape the layers of false awakening was to go deeper, to find the bottom. Or maybe just to stop waking up entirely. The third case was Dr. Raymond Voss, a psychologist at Willowbrook who'd heard about the basement and decided to investigate in May of 1972. He was analytical about it. I took a camera, documented everything. Spent over an hour down there, photographing the rooms, reading through the files that John Halloway had left scattered on that desk. When Dr. Voss came back up, he seemed fine, excited even. Told colleagues he'd found documentation of sleep deprivation experiments that had never been published. Research that could have historical significance. He requested permission to officially access the basement for academic purposes. His request was denied by the administration without explanation. But Dr. Voss started having experiences too, not nightmares, not false awakenings, something stranger. He'd be working during the day, writing reports, conducting therapy sessions, having conversations, and he'd suddenly realize he'd lost time, minutes, sometimes hours, gaps in his memory where he couldn't account for what he'd been doing. He started keeping detailed logs. writing down everything he did, timestamps for every activity, trying to catch the gaps, and he found them. Blocks of time where he'd apparently been awake and functional, but had no memory of it. Once, he found notes in his own handwriting that he didn't remember writing. They said, "They are watching from the other side of sleep. The children opened the door. The door is still open." Dr. Voss left Willowbrook in August 1972, took a position at a private practice in Manhattan. But according to colleagues, he became obsessed with sleep research, with consciousness. With the question of what happens during the hours, we don't remember. He published 2 papers on dissociative states before his death in 1973. Car accident. He'd fallen asleep at the wheel on a highway in broad daylight. The accident report noted that his eyes were open when they found him. 3 staff members. 3 deaths within 2 years. All of them had entered the basement. All of them had experienced symptoms related to sleep, and all of them died under circumstances that investigators found unusual but not suspicious enough to pursue. By mid-1972, rumors were spreading through Willowbrook. Staff were refusing to go near the sublevel. Maintenance workers were requesting transfers to other buildings. The administration couldn't ignore it anymore. In September 1972, Director Walsh, the same man who'd ordered the basement sealed in 1949, issued a new order. The sublevel corridor was to be permanently sealed with concrete, not just the door, the entire corridor, filled completely, made inaccessible. The work was completed in October. Contractors poured concrete behind that steel door until the entire corridor was a solid block, entombed, buried under layers of industrial-grade material designed to last centuries. But even after the concrete set, even after the corridor was erased from the building's accessible spaces, staff still reported problems. The feeling of being watched when working near that area of the building, equipment malfunctions, and the smell. That sweet chemical smell, like formaldehyde, seeping up through ventilation systems that shouldn't have connected to the sealed sublevel, and some staff working late-night shifts still reported hearing it, faint, distant, but unmistakable, that low humming, rhythmic, synchronized, coming from beneath the building, from a space that was supposed to be silent and empty and sealed forever. Willowbrook State School closed in 1987. The residents were moved to other facilities. The buildings fell into disrepair. But the original structure, the one with the basement, remained standing, surrounded by fencing, marked with warnings, officially off-limits. But walls and warnings don't stop everyone, and what happened in that basement didn't stay buried, because the door the children opened in 1949, the one Dr. Vorsman forced wider, the one that 3 staff members walked too close to in 1972, that door was never really closed. The Willowbrook campus today is a strange place. Most of the buildings were demolished in the early 2000s. The land was repurposed, some converted into college campus space for the College of Staten Island, some left as empty lots, some redeveloped into administrative buildings that try very hard not to acknowledge what used to be there. Plaques mention the facility's closure. Documentaries reference the abuse scandals, but the basement, the experiments, those stay buried in footnotes and sealed archives, except for one building, the original administrative structure, Building 12. It still stands. Officially, it's slated for demolition, has been for over a decade. But the funding never materializes. The plans get delayed. The building just sits there, surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with barbed wire, marked with signs warning against trespassing. The windows are boarded, the doors chained, but the structure itself remains intact, a monument to something nobody wants to remember but can't quite erase. And people notice it. Urban explorers, paranormal investigators, true crime enthusiasts who know Willowbrook's history and want to see the site for themselves. Despite the fencing, despite the warnings, despite the increased security patrols that started in 2019, people find ways in, and they document what they find. The earliest modern account comes from 2008. A user on an urban exploration forum posted photos of Willowbrook's exterior, talked about attempting to access Building 12, but being stopped by security. In the comments, someone claiming to be a former contractor mentioned working on the building in 1998, said they were brought in to assess structural integrity. Standard job. Except when they went into the sublevel to check the foundation, they found something strange. The concrete seal that had been poured in 1972 had cracked, not collapsed, just cracked. Hairline fractures spiderwebbing across the surface, and air was moving through those cracks. Not a draft from the building, air pushing out from behind the concrete. Warm air, with that same smell, sweet, chemical, wrong. The contractor said they reported it, recommended investigation, but were told to seal the access point and forget about it. The job was completed. They never went back. In 2011, a YouTube video surfaced, shaky footage filmed on a phone. Two guys had gotten into Building 12 at night. You can hear them whispering, excited about getting inside, joking about ghosts. The video shows them moving through empty corridors, rooms stripped of furniture, graffiti on walls, standard abandoned building stuff. Then they find stairs leading down. They follow them. The excitement in their voices shifts to nervousness. One of them says the air feels different, heavier. The camera shows a hallway at the bottom of the stairs, and at the end of that hallway, a steel door, painted over, marked with warnings. They approach it. The camera gets closer. You can see the door is damaged, dented outward, like something hit it from the other side. The paint is cracked around the dents, and through those cracks, you can see concrete. The seal from 1972. But the concrete has a hole in it, not large, maybe the size of a fist, broken through from the inside. One of them reaches toward the hole. The other one says, "Don't," but he does it anyway, puts his hand close to the opening, and immediately jerks back, says it's warm, says air is coming out, says it smells like a hospital and something else. The camera swings around. They're both backing away. One of them says, "We should go." The other agrees. They're moving faster now, almost running. The video ends abruptly. The YouTube channel posted that video and nothing else. No follow-up, no explanation. Comments asked what happened after, where this was filmed, if they went back. No responses. The account went silent. The video is still up though. 11,000 views. Hundreds of comments speculating about what they found. In 2015, a Reddit user posted a longer account. Username, Willowbrook Wanderer. They claimed to have accessed the building multiple times over several months. I took photos, documented the layout, and eventually found a way to access the sealed basement through a collapsed section of exterior wall that opened into a maintenance tunnel. Their post described getting into the corridor behind the steel door, said the concrete seal had deteriorated significantly. That section of it had crumbled away entirely, exposing the original corridor. They said they walked through it, saw the rooms, saw the rusted bed frames, the scattered toys, the drawings still visible on walls despite decades of decay. But what made their post go viral was the photos they uploaded. 3 images. The first showed one of the small rooms. Empty, dark, the doors hanging open. Everything is covered in dust and decay. Normal, urban exploration stuff. The second showed a wall covered in those drawings. The symbol, the circle with radiating lines, repeated hundreds of times. Layered over each other, different sizes, different levels of fading, but all identical in proportion. All perfect circles despite being hand-drawn by children. The third photo was different. The quality was degraded, grainy, dark. But you could make out a corridor, and on the walls, something that looked like text. Not English, not any recognizable language, just symbols, scratched into the wall. Fresh scratches, according to the poster, not decades old, recently. The caption under the photo said, "Found this in the last room at the end. The scratches are new. The dust on the floor had been disturbed, like something had been moving in here. I didn't stay to find out what." The post continued. Willowbrook Wanderer said they'd experienced severe insomnia after visiting the basement. Said they'd wake up at 3 a.m. every night feeling like they were being watched. Said they kept having the same intrusive thought. They're still awake. They posted one final update 3 days later, just a short paragraph. I went back last night. I don't know why. I just felt pulled to go back. The hole in the concrete is bigger now, much bigger. I went inside. I'm not going to describe what I saw. I'm not going back. If you're reading this and thinking about going there, don't. Some places stay sealed for a reason. Then they deleted their account. The post remained, but the user was gone. People in the comments tried to verify the location, find the building, and confirm the story. Some claimed they'd gone looking and found nothing. Others said security had increased. One user claimed they'd contacted Staten Island police, who said they were aware of trespassing issues at the former Willowbrook site and had increased patrols. And then came 2019. The incident that made authorities take serious action. A group of 4 people, paranormal investigators with a semi-popular YouTube channel, announced they were going to spend a night in Building 12. They promoted it for weeks, teased footage, built hype. On October 31st, Halloween night, they went in with cameras, audio equipment, EMF detectors, and a full ghost hunting setup. They streamed the first 2 hours live, walking through the building, doing the usual paranormal investigation routine. At around 11 p.m., they mentioned finding stairs to the basement level. Chatting was exciting. They descended. The stream quality degraded immediately. The video became glitchy. Audio filled with static. They commented on it. Said their equipment was malfunctioning. One of them joked about electromagnetic interference. Standard stuff for these kinds of streams. They found the steel door, found the hole in the concrete. One of them shined a flashlight through, said they could see the corridor on the other side. They decided to go in. The stream cut out. For 40 minutes, nothing. Chat went wild speculating. Then the stream came back. One camera, shaky footage, heavy breathing, someone running. The person holding the camera was saying, "We have to go right now." You could hear others in the background. Someone is crying. Someone said, "It's following us." The camera swung around briefly, just for a second, showed a corridor behind them. And at the end of that corridor, in the darkness beyond the flashlight's reach, something moved, not a person. The movement was wrong, too fluid, too synchronized, like multiple things moving as one. The stream cut out again, permanently this time. The 4 investigators were found 6 hours later by police, sitting outside the building's perimeter fence. All of them were unharmed physically, but according to the police report, they were disoriented. Couldn't clearly explain what happened. Said they'd gotten lost in the basement, that something was down there, that they'd run and somehow found their way out. None of them would elaborate. They deleted the stream footage, deleted their channel, issued a statement saying they were discontinuing their paranormal investigation work, and they refused every interview request. But one of them broke silence 2 years later. Anonymous interview with a podcast. They described what they'd seen in that basement, said when they went through the hole in the concrete, when they walked into that corridor, the rooms weren't empty. There were shapes in them. Dark shapes that didn't move like shadows, that watched them. That followed them with movements too synchronized to be natural, and they heard humming. That rhythmic, patterned humming. Coming from all around them, from the walls, from beneath the floor. 15 voices, children's voices, singing something that wasn't quite language. They said when they ran, the shapes followed, not chasing, just following, maintaining distance. And the whole time, they felt like they were being herded, guided, pushed towards something deeper in the basement that they never reached because they found a collapsed wall section and broke through to the outside. The interviewer asked what they thought the shapes were. The person hesitated, then said, "I think they were the children, or what's left of them. What came through when Dr. Vorsman opened that door. They've been awake for 70 years. And I think they're waiting for something, or maybe they're trying to show someone what they found on the other side of sleep." After that incident, authorities installed reinforced fencing around Building 12, security cameras, regular patrols, warning signs with legal language about prosecution for trespassing. Officially, it's to prevent injury from structural hazards. Unofficially, something about that building made authorities decide people needed to be kept away. But the reports haven't stopped. People living near the old Willowbrook campus mention hearing things at night. A low humming sound, rhythmic, coming from the direction of Building 12. Maintenance workers for the college report equipment failures near that area. Strange electromagnetic readings. Unexplained cold spots, even in summer. And every few months, someone posts on Reddit or an urban exploration forum, claims they got into Building 12, claims they saw something in the basement. Most posts get dismissed as creative writing, but the details are always consistent. The hole in the concrete, the corridor, the rooms with their frozen moments of decay, the shapes that watch but don't quite move, the humming, and the scratches on the walls, those symbols, fresh, growing, like something is still down there, still awake, still trying to communicate something from the other side of consciousness. Building 12 still stands. The basement is still there, sealed, guarded, marked with warnings. But here's what keeps people awake at night. The question no one wants to ask out loud. If the basement is sealed, if the corridor is filled with concrete, if no one has been down there officially in decades, what's making those fresh scratches on the walls? What's breaking through the concrete from the inside? And what's humming in those rooms that are supposed to be empty? The children died decades ago, all 34 of them, dead before their 19th birthdays. But Dr. Vorsman's research suggested something that no one wanted to believe. That sleep isn't just rest, that it's a barrier, a lock between our consciousness and something else. And if those children have been awake for 70 years, truly awake, in that state beyond exhaustion, beyond dreaming, beyond the threshold where consciousness becomes something other, then maybe they're not gone. Maybe what remains of them is still in those rooms, still synchronized, still connected to whatever they found on the other side of sleep, still waiting. In the end, when we try to make sense of everything you've heard, we're left with a kind of horror that doesn't shout or chase. It lingers. It sits in the quiet corners of the mind, whispering that what happened in that forgotten basement wasn't just a failed experiment, but something far stranger. Because once you strip away the official reports and the carefully polished statements, you're left with a truth that refuses to fit neatly into psychology or science. 34 children entered that facility, and whatever happened to them inside those sleepless corridors didn't stay contained. Some of them changed in ways no medical file can adequately describe, and the rest, well, their silence is its own testimony. And when the cover-up began, it wasn't done out of confusion, it was done with intention, precision, and the kind of fear only people who've seen the unexplainable truly understand. But the part that lingers long after the documents were shredded and the doors were sealed isn't the cruelty or even the secrecy, it's the implication. The idea that sleep might be more than recovery, more than dreaming, more than the body repairing itself. What if sleep is the thin wall between who we are and something waiting on the other side of consciousness? The children weren't just deprived of rest, they were stripped of that barrier. And whatever touched their minds in those final hours, whatever seeped through when they were too tired to hold it back, left marks no cleanse-up committee could erase. There are still rooms down there, sealed beneath new flooring and false walls, but silence doesn't stop echoes, it only hides them. And whether you believe in the supernatural or see this entire story as a warning about institutional cruelty, one fact refuses to fade. 34 children suffered. The evidence was buried, and the questions still drift through that dark, stale air beneath the building. But maybe the most unsettling truth is that unanswered questions don't disappear. They wait. So tonight, when you finally close your eyes, remember, sleep isn't just rest. It's a doorway, and sometimes, a lock. Maybe we aren't simply drifting into dreams. Maybe we're shutting out whatever pressed against those children's minds when they were forced to stay awake. And if that idea follows you into the dark, you're not alone. Because somewhere under that building, behind concrete and dust and silence, something might still be listening and waiting for someone else who forgets to sleep. So I'll leave you with one question. What do you think was really in that basement? And more importantly, do you think they're still awake? Share your theories in the comments. And if you stayed until the end, thank you. Sleep well, if you can. And as you sit with all of this, consider how easily the world forgets the stories it finds inconvenient. Buildings get renovated, records get misplaced, and memories fade into something that sounds like folklore. Yet some events refuse to dissolve, resurfacing in whispers, in rumors, in the uneasy feeling that something was never fully put to rest. Maybe that's why this story endures, not because of proof, but because of absence. Because when an institution spends decades making sure no one asks the wrong questions, it only makes the silence heavier. And in that silence, the imagination fills the gaps with possibilities more disturbing than any document could reveal. So maybe the real horror isn't what happened, but what we were never allowed to understand. And if those unanswered pieces still linger in your thoughts tonight, maybe that's exactly where this story was always meant to live for now.